The house stood alone at the edge of a small, unnamed town, like a forgotten relic from a bygone era. Its weathered walls and creaky wooden floors spoke of years gone by, and the large, overgrown garden that surrounded it was a testament to its prolonged solitude. I had moved into this house a few weeks ago, drawn by its isolation and the quiet it promised a perfect haven for a freelance writer like me, seeking solace and inspiration away from the bustling city life. My days quickly settled into a routine. Mornings were for writing, afternoons for long walks in the surrounding woods, and evenings for reading by the fireplace. The house, with all its quirks and creaks, felt like a character in itself, adding a unique backdrop to my daily life. However, as days passed, a subtle sense of unease began to grow within me, an inexplicable feeling that I was not entirely alone. The locals, whom I encountered on my occasional trips to the town for supplies, were friendly, but always maintained a respectful distance. Their conversations often hushed when I approached, and I could sense their eyes on me, heavy with unspoken thoughts. I knew the house had a history, one that the townspeople were reluctant to share, but my curiosity was piqued. Little did I know, my quest for solitude would soon turn into a confrontation with the unknown. It was a rainy evening, the kind where the world outside seemed blurred and distant. I was immersed in writing, the rhythmic tapping of rain against the window panes, a soothing background to my thoughts. That's when I first heard a knock at the door. Startled, I glanced at the clock. It was past 9 p.m., an unusual time for visitors in this secluded part of town. I stood up, stretching my stiff limbs, and walked to the door, expecting perhaps a delivery I had forgotten about or a traveler lost in the storm. But when I opened the door, I was met with nothing but the pouring rain and the darkness of the night. Puzzled, I stepped out, peering into the shadows, but there was no sign of anyone. I concluded it must have been kids playing a prank and returned to my work, brushing off the incident. However, the knocks continued, each night, always at the same time. Every instance revealed the same emptiness outside my door. It was unsettling, the consistency of it. I began to feel a sense of dread each night as the clock neared the hour, my heart rate increasing with every tick. It wasn't just the knocking that unnerved me, I started feeling a persistent sensation of being watched, and sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I thought I heard whispers, so faint that I couldn't be sure if they were real or just figments of my imagination. This pattern disrupted my peace, turning my haven into a place of growing anxiety. I tried talking to the locals about it, but they just exchanged nervous glances and quickly changed the subject. Their avoidance only fueled my unease, making me feel more isolated in my experiences. The once comforting solitude of the house was now replaced with a lingering fear, a feeling that something unseen was sharing the space with me, something that didn't quite belong to the world of the living. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I began researching the history of the house. The local library was a small, dusty room at the back of the town hall, with archives that smelled of old paper and secrets. Through faded newspapers and town records, I pieced together a tale of the previous inhabitant, a reclusive man who, one day, vanished without a trace. The only legacy he left behind were whispered tales of an unseen entity he claimed roamed the halls of the house. As days turned into weeks, the disturbances in the house escalated. It started with small, easily dismissible occurrences, a book falling off a shelf, a picture frame askew. But soon, these incidents grew more frequent and impossible to ignore. Doors would slam shut in the middle of the night, cold drafts appeared in closed rooms, and I would often find my belongings not where I had left them. It felt as if the house itself was alive, its invisible inhabitant making its presence known in subtle yet undeniable ways. My isolation deepened. I felt cut off from the world outside, my phone calls to friends and family going unanswered, as if the house itself was interfering with my attempts to reach out. The locals' reluctance to engage with me only added to my sense of solitude. In desperation, I installed cameras around the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing the disturbances. Night after night, I reviewed the footage, only to find nothing. The cameras showed the empty rooms, undisturbed and peaceful, directly contradicting the chaos I experienced. This disparity between what I saw and what the cameras captured only heightened my sense of paranoia. It was as if the entity knew it was being watched and reveled in its ability to remain unseen. The house, once a place of refuge, had become a prison of sorts, its walls echoing with sounds that shouldn't exist. I was living in a constant state of heightened alertness, every shadow and noise, sending a jolt of fear through me. The boundary between reality and imagination blurred, leaving me to question my own sanity. The climax of my ordeal came on a stormy night, when the rain was more torrential than ever, lashing against the house with an almost angry fervor. The knocking, which had become a dreaded part of my nightly routine, transformed that night. It was no longer a series of gentle taps, but a frantic thunderous banging that echoed through the hallways. My heart pounded in my chest, each bang resonating with my own fear. Something within me snapped, the need to confront whatever was tormenting me outweighed the terror that gripped my heart. I strode towards the door, determined to face whatever lay beyond it. As I flung the door open, the wind howled in, but again, there was no one there. The darkness outside seemed to stare back at me, an abyss from which anything could emerge. But it wasn't the emptiness of the night that froze me to my spot, it was what happened next. The air around me grew colder, and a shiver ran down my spine. My eyes began to play tricks on me, or so I thought. In the corners of the rooms, in the reflections of the windows, I caught glimpses of someone. A figure, ghostly and distorted, with a face so disfigured it was barely human. But every time I blinked, it vanished, leaving me to question if it was ever there. Panic set in, a primal, all-consuming terror. I ran through the house, trying to escape the presence I felt looming over me. But it was as if the house itself was a maze, the corridors and rooms twisting and turning in impossible ways. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony that filled my ears with an indecipherable language. In a last-ditch effort, I locked myself in my study, panting and trembling. The room felt safe, familiar. But as my breathing slowed and I looked around, I realized I wasn't alone. There, in the faint glow of my desk lamp, stood the figure, its twisted features barely inches from mine. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, my voice caught in my throat. The figure didn't speak, didn't move, its existence a silent testament to the unknown horrors that lurked within the house. The realization that this entity was not just a figment of my imagination but something real and tangible, filled me with a dread unlike anything I had ever felt. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the room, my heart racing and my mind reeling from the encounter. The morning after the storm, I awoke on the floor of my study, the memories of the night before flooding back in a terrifying rush. The sun streamed through the windows, its rays doing little to dispel the cold fear that clung to me. The house was eerily silent, as if the storm and the events it brought with it were nothing but a dream. But the sense of dread that enveloped me was all too real. In the following days, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The entity, whatever it was, had made its presence unequivocally known. The disturbances that once seemed random now felt like deliberate attempts to communicate or perhaps to torment. Objects would move right before my eyes, doors would slam shut as I approached, and the temperature would drop inexplicably in certain rooms. I tried to leave, packing my bags with a frenzied urgency. But every attempt was thwarted. My car wouldn't start, the roads out of town were inexplicably blocked, and my phone could no longer find any signal. It was as if the house, or the entity within it, was keeping me there. Nightmares plagued my sleep, vivid and disturbing. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if urging me towards something I couldn't understand. I was trapped in a cycle of fear and confusion, the lines between reality and the supernatural blurring beyond recognition. The house no longer felt like my home, but a haunted prison, its walls echoing with the remnants of something ancient and unknowable. As the days melded into an indistinguishable haze, I came to a disturbing realization. My life was no longer my own. It belonged, in part, to the unseen entity that shared this space with me. There was a perverse sense of acceptance that settled over me, a surrender to the bizarre and terrifying reality of my existence within these walls. The entity, though never visible in its entirety again, remained a constant presence in my life. The unexplainable occurrences became routine, almost mundane in their regularity. I found myself speaking to it at times, asking questions to the empty air, half expecting a response that never came. My writing, once a source of joy and escape, became my tether to sanity. I wrote about my experiences, the fears, the sights and sounds of a house haunted by something that defied explanation. The act of putting pen to paper gave me a sense of control, a way to impose order on the chaos that had enveloped my life. The story ends with me still in the house, unable to leave, yet no longer trying to. I had become a part of the house's lore, another chapter in its long and mysterious history. My days were spent chronicling the surreal nature of my cohabitation with the unseen entity, my nights listening to the whispers that seemed to seep out of the very walls. In the final scene, I sit at my desk, writing the last lines of this account. The air around me is cold, the feeling of being watched ever present. But there is a strange comfort in the familiarity of it all. The story closes not with a resolution, but with an acceptance of the unresolved, the unknown. The entity remains, its intentions unclear, its nature an enigma. And I, its unwilling companion, continue to live in the shadow of its presence, the lines between the haunted and the haunter forever blurred. The only truth I hold on to is that the entity and I are bound together in this dance of the supernatural, each a prisoner in our own way. And as I set my pen down, I wonder if this story will ever truly end, or if it will linger on, like the whispers in the dark, a tale of the unseen visitor that became a part of my life.